I am Leah, 34 years old, a successful real estate agent in Seattle, with what I thought was a close-knit family until everything shattered with one act of betrayal. That Sunday lunch was supposed to be like any other, filled with casual conversation and home-cooked food. Instead, it ended with sizzling oil, excruciating pain, and screams that still echo in my nightmares. What I never expected was how standing my ground would change everything. If you're watching this from a place where family means everything, drop a comment below and hit subscribe. You'll want to hear how I turned this nightmare into the strongest version of myself. Growing up in a modest Seattle neighborhood shaped who I am today. My mother raised me alone after my father walked out when I was just 5 years old. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, instilling in me the values of independence and self-reliance. Never depend on anyone else for your happiness or security, Leah, she would tell me while rushing between shifts. Those words became my life philosophy, guiding me through school and into adulthood. I put myself through college, working evenings and weekends, graduating with a business degree, and immediately diving into the competitive world of real estate. Starting as an assistant, I worked tirelessly to learn every aspect of the business, staying late, to understand contracts and market trends while my peers were out socializing. 8 years ago, my life changed when I attended a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital. I was there representing my brokerage, though admittedly I was more focused on potential networking opportunities than the charity itself. That changed when James approached my table with a warm smile and intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. "Not enjoying the rubber chicken?" he asked, noticing my barely touched plate. His genuine manner disarmed me immediately. Unlike the slick businessmen I usually encountered, James spoke thoughtfully and listened intently. He told me he was a high school English teacher who loved introducing students to literature that changed his life. His passion for his work was infectious. We exchanged numbers, and by the end of our first date, I knew there was something special between us. Our courtship was a whirlwind of bookstore dates, hiking trips to Mount Rainier, and long conversations about everything and nothing. Within a year, we were planning our wedding. That was when I first met Deborah, James's mother. She hosted an elaborate dinner to welcome me to the family, and initially, I was charmed by her attention to detail and seemingly warm nature. She embraced me tightly, calling me the daughter she never had. Yet something in her eyes didn't match her smile when she watched James and me together. "James has always been my special boy," she said while showing me family photos. "He needs someone who understands how sensitive he is." There was an underlying message in her words that I couldn't quite decipher at the time. Our wedding was small but beautiful, with my mother beaming proudly in the front row and Deborah crying, perhaps a bit too dramatically, as we exchanged vows. I remember her whispered words as she hugged me at the reception, "Welcome to the family, dear. We always protect our own." The statement felt more like a warning than a welcome. The first 2 years of marriage were blissful as we settled into our routine. James continued teaching while I climbed the ranks at my brokerage, eventually becoming one of their top-selling agents. My income steadily grew until I was making nearly 3 times what James earned, though he never seemed to mind. He loved his students and the difference he made in their lives. With my increasing success came the opportunity to purchase our dream home. I found a stunning craftsman in one of Seattle's most desirable neighborhoods with original woodwork, a garden perfect for entertaining, and enough space for the family we someday hope to have. The down payment came entirely from my savings and commission from a particularly lucrative commercial deal. When we moved in, James spun me around in the empty living room, both of us laughing like children. "You did this, Leah. You made our dream come true," he said. I corrected him. "We did this together." But deep down, I felt proud that my hard work had created this security for us. Deborah's reaction to our new home was less enthusiastic. During her first visit, she walked through each room with pursed lips, running her finger along surfaces as if checking for dust. "It's certainly large," she commented. "I hope James won't feel lost in such a big place while you're working all those long hours." The barb was subtle but pointed. As my career continued to flourish, Deborah's comments about my work hours, my housekeeping, and my cooking became more frequent. "In my day, wives made sure dinner was on the table when their husbands came home," she would say, while rearranging my kitchen cabinets without asking. When I expressed frustration to James, he would sigh and say, "That's just how Mum is. She means well." His unwillingness to establish boundaries with his mother became a source of tension between us, though we rarely addressed it directly. I tried accommodating Deborah's traditional values, inviting her for dinner regularly, and enduring her critical glances when she noticed takeout containers in our trash or dust on the bookshelves. I wanted to maintain peace in our family, believing that with time, she would accept me fully. Looking back, I realized I was sacrificing my own comfort in a vain attempt to win approval from someone who had already decided not to give it. Sunday family lunches at Deborah's house started as a monthly tradition, but gradually became weekly obligations. Missing one was treated as a personal affront, with James receiving multiple calls and messages expressing disappointment and guilt. I suggested hosting sometimes, but Deborah insisted her house was more comfortable and properly set up for entertaining. Each lunch followed the same routine: arrival at noon, sharp detailed interrogation about our week, subtle criticisms of my appearance, or contributions, followed by a meal where Deborah showcased her cooking skills while pointing out how I should take notes for James's benefit. "James loves his potatoes mashed with extra butter, not the way you make them," she would say while spooning seconds onto his plate. Or, "I noticed Leah hasn't learned to iron your shirts properly, son. Those collars need special attention." James would shift uncomfortably, but never contradict his mother. Instead, he'd change the subject or laugh awkwardly, leaving me to defend myself or silently accept the criticism. Over time, I chose silence more often, recognizing that any defense only prolonged the uncomfortable exchanges. The real trouble began when I discovered that Deborah had a key to our house. I came home early one day with a migraine to find her rearranging our bedroom furniture to improve the energy flow. When I asked how she got in, she casually mentioned that James had given her a key months ago in case of emergencies. That evening, I confronted James about this boundary violation. "Why would you give your mother access to our home without discussing it with me?" I asked, trying to control my anger. James looked surprised by my reaction. "She's family, Leah. She just wants to help out sometimes when you're busy with work." Help out by going through our personal things, moving our furniture without asking. "You're overreacting, yeah," he said dismissively. "Mom raised me alone after Dad left. She's used to taking care of me, and she's just trying to take care of us now." This pattern repeated itself in various forms. I would discover Deborah had reorganized my kitchen cabinets, replaced our shower curtain with one she thought more appropriate, or left notes about better ways to organize our pantry. Each time, James minimized my concerns and defended his mother's intrusions. As these tensions built at home, I found myself withdrawing from social engagements. My close friend Tanya noticed first, calling after I missed our monthly dinner date for the third time. "What's going on with you?" she asked bluntly. "You've been cancelling plans, you look exhausted, and I haven't seen you smile in months." I found myself pouring out everything. The criticism, the invasion of privacy, James's failure to support me. Tanya listened without interruption, then said words that should have been a warning. "Leah, this isn't just an annoying mother-in-law. This is emotional abuse, and James is enabling it." I dismissed her concern, making excuses about family dynamics and cultural differences. But her words lingered in my mind, especially as the situation escalated. Around this time, Deborah introduced us to her friend Marjorie, a wealthy widow in her mid-60s who became a fixture at our Sunday lunches. Marjorie lived in an upscale retirement community, but constantly complained about her neighbours, the management, and the cramped quarters of her luxury apartment. Initially, I sympathised with her adjustment difficulties, but soon noticed a pattern in these conversations. Deborah would prompt Marjorie with questions like, "Tell James and Leah about that noisy neighbour again," or "Didn't you say the heating system in your building is unreliable?" These discussions always ended with meaningful glances between Deborah and Marjorie, followed by comments about how wonderful it would be to have a proper house again, or questions about our neighbourhood. Meanwhile, my career continued to flourish. I was nominated for a National Real Estate Achievement Award, recognising my sales record and client satisfaction ratings. When I shared the exciting news at Sunday lunch, Deborah responded with a dismissive wave. "That's nice, dear, but James had a student write him a thank you letter this week. Imagine changing a young person's life like that. Now that's an achievement." The contrast in how she treated our professional accomplishments became increasingly obvious. James receiving a standard teacher appreciation gift warranted a special dessert at lunch, while my closing a multi-million-dollar commercial deal barely earned a nod. Despite these tensions, I remained committed to my marriage and tried to maintain a peaceful relationship with Deborah. I believed that with patience and understanding, we could eventually reach a healthier dynamic. How terribly wrong I was. The Sunday that everything began to unravel started like any other. James and I arrived at Deborah's house precisely at noon, bringing the requested bottle of wine and dessert. The difference was immediately apparent when Deborah opened the door with an unusually bright smile. "There you are. Come in quickly. I have a special guest today," she exclaimed, ushering us into the dining room, where Marjorie sat at the table dressed in an expensive suit rather than her usual casual attire. I glanced at James, whose expression suggested this wasn't a surprise to him. That small betrayal, his foreknowledge of this ambush, sent a chill through me. Lunch proceeded with unusual pleasantness from both Deborah and Marjorie. They complimented my outfit, asked about my work with seemingly genuine interest, and served my favourite foods rather than just James's preferences. The change was so dramatic it made me deeply suspicious. As we finished the main course, Deborah cleared her throat theatrically. "I wanted us all together today because poor Marjorie has been having such a difficult time." She began reaching over to pat her friend's hand sympathetically. Marjorie dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "The retirement community has become unbearable. The new neighbours above me have grandchildren visiting, constantly running and screaming at all hours. And last week they had a pipe burst that damaged some of my antique furniture." "That's terrible," James said, his voice full of practiced concern. "Isn't that terrible, Leah?" Before I could respond with appropriate sympathy, Deborah delivered the bombshell. "Marjorie needs a proper house with space and privacy, and then I had the most wonderful idea." Her eyes gleamed as she looked between James and me. "Your house would be perfect for her." I froze my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your beautiful house, it's much too big for just the two of you and in such a perfect location for Marjorie. All her friends live in that area and her doctor's office is nearby." I looked at James, expecting him to laugh at this absurd suggestion or immediately shut it down. Instead, he was studying his plate, a flush creeping up his neck. "Our house isn't for sale," I said firmly, setting down my fork. "Oh, Leah, don't be so literal." Deborah chuckled as if I'd said something amusing. "Of course it's not on the market. This would be a private arrangement, family helping family." "Distinct." She gestured toward Marjorie. "Marjorie is practically family after all these years." Marjorie leaned forward, her jewellery clinking against her plate. "I would naturally offer a fair price. Perhaps not quite market value. Property prices are so inflated these days. But a reasonable sum. We're not interested in selling our home," I repeated more firmly this time. "At any price." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Deborah's smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped expression I'd come to know well. "James," she said, ignoring me completely, "surely you can explain to your wife how important this is. Marjorie has been like an aunt to you since you were a child. She needs our help." James finally looked up, his eyes darting between his mother and me. "Maybe we could at least discuss it, Leah. Not necessarily selling, but perhaps." I cut him off, my patience evaporating. "There's nothing to discuss. We bought that house as our home, not as an investment property to flip when someone decides they want it." The lunch deteriorated quickly after that. Deborah made pointed remarks about selfish people and real family values, while Marjorie sighed dramatically and mentioned friends who had children who truly cared about their elders. James remained mostly silent, occasionally attempting to change the subject, but never directly supporting my position. On the drive home, I finally expressed my shock at his failure to back me up. "I can't believe you sat there while they tried to pressure us into selling our home," I said, my hands tight on the steering wheel. "Mom can be pushy, but her heart's in the right place," he replied weakly. "Marjorie has been good to our family. Maybe we should at least consider it. Consider selling the house I worked years to afford, the home we've created together, to someone who expects a discount because she's your mother's friend." My voice rose with each question. "You always make everything about money," James muttered, staring out the window. "There are more important things than property values." That comment stung deeply. It wasn't about money. It was about our home, our security, and most importantly, the disturbing expectation that I should sacrifice my hard-earned stability for someone else's comfort. The next day, I called Tanya and explained the situation. She reacted with appropriate outrage. "That's completely insane," she said. "They want you to sell your house to this random old lady because she doesn't like her neighbours. Who does that?" Her validation calmed me somewhat, but I remained troubled by James's reaction. That evening, I decided to do some research on Marjorie, using skills I'd developed in real estate, to investigate property records and public information. What I discovered shocked me. Far from needing financial assistance, Marjorie had received a substantial insurance settlement after her husband's death, owned investment properties in 2 states, and had recently sold a vacation home in Palm Springs for a significant profit. She wasn't a struggling widow. She was quite wealthy and appeared to be living well below her means. When I presented this information to James, expecting him to share my indignation, he became defensive. "Why are you investigating Mom's friends? That's invasive and inappropriate." "What's inappropriate is them trying to manipulate us into selling our home under false pretenses," I countered. "Maybe we should consider it," he said after a long pause. "The housing market is good right now. We could find something smaller, save some money." I stared at him, feeling as though I was seeing a stranger. "This is our home, James. The home we chose together that we've built memories in. I'm not selling it because your mother's friend wants it." End of discussion. That night, lying beside my husband in the bedroom of the home, I now realized I might have to fight to keep. I felt the first real fracture in our marriage, a crack that would soon become an unbridgeable chasm. The weeks following that disastrous lunch brought escalating tensions and discoveries that shook the foundation of my marriage. I began noticing small changes in James's behavior, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, unexplained absences, and a growing coldness whenever I mentioned future plans for our home. My suspicions grew until one Tuesday, when a text message from our neighbor changed everything. "Is today the house showing saw some people going in with a realtor's folder? Mrs. Klein wrote, knowing I was also in the business. I called her immediately, my heart racing. She described an older woman in expensive clothes, accompanied by my mother-in-law and James, entering our house around noon. I checked my calendar. James should have been teaching his afternoon classes. Driving home with shaking hands, I found the house empty but disturbed. Couch cushions were rearranged, closet doors left ajar, and measuring tape on the kitchen counter. In our bedroom, drawers had been opened and family photos moved. I waited in the living room, fury building with each passing minute. When James finally arrived home, his startled expression upon seeing me confirmed everything. "Leah, I thought you had showings until 7 tonight." "Clearly," I replied coldly. "That would have given you enough time to clean up after giving Marjorie a private tour of our home." His face flushed, but instead of apologizing, he went on the offensive. "You're being unreasonable about this whole situation. Mum has been calling me every day crying about how Marjorie needs help. So you went behind my back, showed our home to a stranger without my knowledge or consent. I'm your wife, James." "And she's my mother," he shouted back, his composure finally breaking. "She raised me alone after Dad left. Everything I am, I owe to her. She's never asked me for anything until now. She's not asking for a favor. She's asking for our home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why is Marjorie so fixated on our house specifically? "There are dozens of similar properties available in this neighborhood." James looked away, his expression guarded. After a tense silence, he admitted, "Mom has been having financial problems. Marjorie promised to help her out if she gets our house." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't about Marjorie needing a home. This was about Deborah using her son's loyalty to secure some kind of financial arrangement with her wealthy friend. I felt physically ill. "So your mother is essentially selling our house out from under us for her own gain," I said flatly. "It's not like that," James protested weakly. "She needs help with her mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure. And you didn't think to tell me this. We could have helped her directly if she needed money. You know how proud she is," he muttered. In the following days, my trust continued to erode as I discovered more betrayals. Looking through our shared laptop, I found property listings James had been browsing, all in neighborhoods far less desirable than our current location, with smaller houses at lower price points. He had been researching downgrading our living situation without discussing it with me. More damning were the text messages I glimpsed on his phone while he was in the shower. A conversation with Deborah revealed their strategy: keep working on Leah. Once she agrees to sell, Marjorie's offer will be ready. Remember how much this means to me, James. When I confronted him about these discoveries, James didn't even deny them. "You don't understand family loyalty," he said, his voice cold. "Sometimes we make sacrifices for the people who raised us." "And what about loyalty to your wife?" I asked. "To the vows you made to put our relationship first." He had no answer. The final straw came when I called Deborah, directly hoping to understand her perspective and possibly find some resolution. Instead of a rational conversation, I received threats. "James has always been devoted to me," she said, her voice eerily calm. "If you force him to choose between his mother and his stubborn wife, I promise you won't like the outcome. Be smart, Leah." Sign the papers, take the money, and everyone stays happy. Is that why you raised him, to control him for your financial benefit? I asked, my anger finally matching hers. I raised him to respect family above all else, something your broken home clearly never taught you. The call ended with her final warning. Next Sunday's lunch is very important. Marjorie is bringing paperwork. I suggest you come prepared to be reasonable, or your marriage might not survive the dessert course. I spent that night on our couch, staring at the ceiling of the home I loved, wondering how my marriage had become a battleground, and my husband an adversary. For the first time, I began to consider what my life might look like if I stood my ground, even if it meant standing alone. Sunday arrived with a sense of foreboding that settled in my stomach like lead. James had barely spoken to me all week, sleeping in the guest room and leaving for work before I awoke. Despite the growing distance between us, he assumed I would attend the lunch as usual, mentioning casually that we should leave by 11:30 to make sure we arrive on time. The drive to Deborah's house was tense and silent. I watched Seattle's familiar landscape pass by, wondering if this would be the last of these Sunday drives I would ever take. Part of me wanted to tell James to turn around, to refuse to participate in this charade, but another part needed to see this through, to face whatever was coming head on. Deborah's house was unusually pristine when we arrived, with fresh flowers on the entryway table and the distinct scent of furniture polish hanging in the air. She greeted James with a warm embrace, but merely nodded curtly in my direction. "Marjorie is already here," she announced, ushering us toward the dining room. "She's brought some paperwork for us to review together." And some. Sure enough, Marjorie sat at the dining table, not dressed for a casual family lunch, but in a tailored navy suit that screamed business meeting. Beside her place setting was a leather portfolio that I immediately recognized as the type used for real estate contracts. "Leah, James, so wonderful to see you both," Marjorie said with artificial warmth. "I hope you've had time to consider our discussion." "Let's eat first," Deborah interrupted, bringing out a platter of appetizers. "Everything goes better with good food." I noticed immediately that she had prepared all of James's favorite dishes. His preferred stuffed mushrooms, the spinach dip he loved, even the specific brand of crackers he had enjoyed since childhood. Nothing on the table reflected my tastes or preferences, a pointed exclusion that didn't go unnoticed. The small talk during appetizers was excruciating, filled with pointed comments from both Deborah and Marjorie about selfish people and the younger generation's lack of respect for their elders. James remained unusually quiet, picking at his food and avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially me. As Deborah served the main course, James's favourite pot roast, Marjorie cleared her throat and opened her leather portfolio. "I thought we might discuss the house situation while we enjoy this lovely meal," she said, extracting several documents. "I've taken the liberty of having my attorney draw up a simple purchase agreement." She slid the papers across the table toward us. I didn't touch them, but James reached out hesitantly, scanning the first page. "As you can see, I'm offering $400,000, Marjorie continued. "I know the market value is higher, but considering the convenience of a private sale and the family connection, I think this is more than fair." Our house was worth nearly $700,000 in the current market. This wasn't just a discount, it was highway robbery. "We're not selling," I said firmly, leaving the papers untouched. Deborah set down a serving bowl with unnecessary force. "Leah, we've discussed this. Marjorie needs a proper home, and this arrangement would benefit everyone. It would benefit Marjorie, who would get a house for nearly half its value, and apparently it would benefit you somehow too," I replied, looking directly at her. "But it certainly wouldn't benefit us to lose our home and hundreds of thousands in equity. Sometimes family makes sacrifices." Deborah hissed, her facade of pleasantness evaporating. "We'd let you stay in the basement apartment until you find somewhere suitable," Marjorie added, as if offering a generous concession. "It has its own bathroom, though you'd need to share the kitchen upstairs with me." The audacity of this woman suggesting I could live in the basement of my own home left me momentarily speechless. I looked to James, hoping against hope that this outrageous suggestion would finally snap him out of his complicity. To my horror, he picked up a pen from beside Marjorie's portfolio and uncapped it, staring at the contract with a conflicted expression. "James," I said softly, "this is our home. We chose it together." "Mom needs help," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "This is the only way." "No, it's not," I countered firmly. "If Deborah needs financial assistance, we can discuss helping her directly, but I will not sign away our house." James finally looked at me, his expression hardening. Maybe you should be more flexible, Leah. This is important to my family. I am your family, I reminded him, and legally the house is primarily mine. It was purchased with my down payment and the mortgage is in my name because my income and credit score qualified for better terms. You can't sell it without my consent. This revelation landed like a bomb at the table. James knew this fact, of course, but Deborah and Marjorie clearly didn't. Marjorie's confident smile faltered and Deborah's face flushed dark red. What exactly are you saying? Deborah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm saying that I won't be pressured, manipulated, or coerced into selling my home to fulfill whatever arrangement you've made with Marjorie. The house is not for sale, not to her, not to anyone. What happened next occurred so quickly that I had no time to react. Deborah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Without a word, she stormed into the kitchen. I assumed she needed a moment to compose herself, but seconds later, she returned holding a cast iron pan that had been heating on the stove. You ungrateful, selfish witch, she snarled, and before anyone could move, she flung the contents of the pan directly at my face. Searing, unimaginable pain exploded across my skin as hot cooking oil made contact. I screamed a primal sound I didn't recognize as my own voice. The burning sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming, spreading across my cheek, jaw, and neck. Through my screams and the chaos that followed, I was dimly aware of Marjorie gathering her papers and hastily leaving, of James shouting at his mother, of Deborah's voice suddenly shifting from rage to a high-pitched plea. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. The pan slipped. James called 911 while I sat frozen in agony, unable to touch my face, feeling the oil continue to burn into my skin. Deborah hovered nearby, her earlier rage replaced by theatrical concern for the benefit of the emergency dispatcher on speakerphone. My daughter-in-law has been burned accidentally, she kept saying. It was a terrible kitchen accident. The pan slipped from my hands. Even through my pain, I registered the calculated nature of her lies. There had been no slip, no accident. I had seen the deliberate intention in her eyes as she threw that oil at my face. The paramedics arrived quickly, their gentle hands applying burn gel that provided minimal relief. As they prepared to transport me to the hospital, I heard Deborah's parting whisper as she hugged James. She pushed me to it. Remember who was there for you when your father left. Blood is thicker than water, son. In the ambulance drifting in and out of consciousness from the pain medication, I realized that this violent act had clarified everything. The battle for our house had never really been about property or money. It was about control power and a mother's refusal to relinquish her hold on her son, even at the cost of his marriage. As the sirens wailed and the city streets blurred outside the ambulance windows, I made a silent promise to myself I would heal from these burns. But I would never again allow myself to be burned by these people who claimed to be family. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights, concerned voices, and the blessed numbness that came with stronger medication. Doctors explained that I had second-degree burns on approximately 20% of my face, neck, and upper chest. The hot oil had caused significant damage, but I had been fortunate, if that word could be applied to such a situation, that my quick reaction of turning away had protected my eyes. Will there be permanent scarring? I asked, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. The burn specialist, a woman with kind eyes and a straightforward manner, didn't sugarcoat her response. There will likely be some scarring, particularly on your cheek and jaw. But with proper treatment, specialized creams, and possibly some minor procedures later, we can minimize the long-term visual impact. They admitted me to the burn unit, where the next several days passed in a cycle of dressing changes, pain management, and visits from various specialists. James appeared at my bedside the morning after the incident, his eyes red-rimmed and his posture defeated. The police want to talk to you, he said without preamble. Mom is saying it was an accident that you bumped into her while she was carrying the pan from the stove. I stared at him in disbelief. You were there. You saw what happened. She threw that oil at me deliberately. He looked away, studying the linoleum floor. She's my mother, Leah. They're talking about assault charges. She could go to jail. And that would be appropriate for someone who threw hot oil in another person's face, wouldn't it? My voice was flat, drained of emotion by pain medication, and the realization that my husband was still torn between his mother and me, even after what she had done. James visited daily, but grew increasingly distant as the week progressed. He would bring flowers or magazines, sit silently for the required 20 minutes of a dutiful husband, then leave with transparent relief. I later learned from the nursing staff that he was spending much more time in the hospital cafe with his mother, who came daily but was not permitted in my room per my explicit instructions to the medical team. Tanya was my salvation during this time. Unlike James, she came for hours bringing practical items I needed coordinating with my office about medical leave and, most importantly, documenting everything. She took photos of my injuries with the hospital staff's permission, recorded my account of what happened, and insisted I file a police report. This wasn't a family disagreement that got out of hand, she said firmly. This was assault, premeditated, deliberate assault. On my 5th day in the hospital, Deborah somehow managed to circumvent the staff restrictions and appeared in my room while I was alone. She was dressed immaculately, carrying an ostentatious bouquet and wearing an expression of practiced concern. "Leah, darling, I've been so worried about you," she began, her voice syrupy with false emotion. "Get out," I said, simply reaching for the call button. "I just want you to know how terrible I feel about our accident." She continued, emphasizing the word accident with meaningful intensity. "These things happen in families. We argue, emotions run high, but we forgive because that's what families do." I lowered my hand from the call button, suddenly curious to hear how far she would take this charade. "James has been devastated," she continued. "Torn between his mother and his wife, which is a position no good son should ever be in." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I raised that boy after his father abandoned us. Every sacrifice, every opportunity he's had came from my sweat and tears. He knows where his loyalty belongs." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my medicated state perhaps making me bolder than I might otherwise have been. Her artificial smile never wavered. "It's a reminder of reality, dear. When you leave this hospital, you'll have some decisions to make. I hope for everyone's sake that you'll make the right ones. Marriages can recover from all sorts of difficulties when both parties are willing to compromise." She placed the flowers on my bedside table and turned to leave, pausing at the door. "James mentioned you are considering pressing charges. I would strongly reconsider that course of action if you value your marriage." After she left, I pressed the call button, asking the nurse to remove the flowers and again restrict all visitors except those on my approved list. Then I called Tanya, who connected me with her cousin Amanda, a family law attorney who also had experience with domestic violence cases. Amanda visited the next day, her professional demeanour a welcome change from the emotional manipulation I'd been subjected to. "What happened to you wasn't just a family disagreement," she stated after hearing my account. "It was aggravated assault, and from what you've described, there's a clear case for premeditation. Your mother-in-law made threats before the incident and has continued making threats regarding your relationship with your husband." She helped me file for a temporary restraining order against Deborah and laid out my options regarding criminal charges and potential civil action. We also discussed the uncomfortable reality of my marriage. "Given your husband's response, do you feel safe returning to your shared home?" Amanda asked directly. The question hit me with unexpected force. Did I feel safe with James, the man who had failed to defend me against his mother's manipulations for years, who even now seemed more concerned with protecting her than supporting his injured wife? "No," I admitted finally. "I don't think I do." Over the next few days, as my condition improved enough for discharge planning, James's visits became less frequent. When he did come, he primarily talked about moving past this unfortunate incident and keeping the family together. Not once did he acknowledge the deliberate nature of his mother's attack or express genuine outrage on my behalf. During this time, I discovered through a slip from a well-meaning nurse that James hadn't been staying at our house, as he'd claimed, but at his mother's. The small betrayal felt like confirmation of everything I feared. The day before my discharge, Amanda returned with divorce papers. "You don't have to file these immediately," she explained, "but having them prepared gives you options. Given what you've told me about the house situation, I'm also concerned about potential financial moves your husband might make under his mother's influence." She was right to be worried. That evening, I received an alert from our home security system showing Deborah entering our house with James, a direct violation of the restraining order. I forwarded the footage to Amanda and the police officer handling my case. When James came the next morning to drive me home, I was ready with my decision. "I'm not going back to the house with you," I told him calmly. "Tanya is picking me up and I'll be staying with her for a while." "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, frustration evident in his voice. "You need care during your recovery. I'm your husband." A husband who chose his mother over me even after she deliberately threw hot oil in my face. I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion building inside me. A husband who has been staying at his mother's house while telling me he was with friends. A husband who brought that same mother to our home yesterday, violating a legal restraining order. His face paled. You have cameras in our house. Our security system sends alerts when anyone enters. Did you forget that, or did you simply not care about the legal consequences of your actions? I handed him the envelope containing the divorce papers. I won't be coming home, James. Not now, not ever. You have a choice to make, but I've already made mine. He stared at the papers, then at me, his expression shifting from shock to anger. You can't do this. That's our house, our life. It was, I agreed sadly. But your mother threw more than oil that day. She threw away any chance of us continuing as we were. As James left, clutching the divorce papers and protesting that I was overreacting, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The physical pain of my burns was still present, but for the first time since that horrific Sunday, I felt like I could breathe again. The months that followed were both the most challenging and most transformative of my life. Physical recovery from burn injuries is a slow, often painful process, requiring dedication to wound care, specialized treatments, and gradually increasing activity as healing progresses. But the emotional recovery proved even more demanding, requiring a complete reassessment of my marriage, my self-worth, and my definition of family. I stayed with Tanya for the first 3 weeks after hospital discharge, her spare bedroom becoming my sanctuary as I navigated the early stages of both burn recovery and divorce proceedings. Her unwavering support created a safe space where I could begin to process the trauma I had experienced. You know what amazes me, she said one evening as she helped apply the special cream to my healing burns. Your strength through all of this. Most people would have crumbled. I feel anything but strong, I admitted, wincing as the cream stung slightly. Some days I can barely get out of bed. But you do get out of bed, she pointed out. And you're fighting for yourself instead of giving in to their manipulation. That's real strength, Leah. Physical therapy became a cornerstone of my routine, both for the burn recovery and for my mental health. The repetitive exercises gave me a sense of control during a time when so much felt beyond my influence. Each small improvement in mobility or reduction in pain became a victory to celebrate. My therapist, Dr. Eleanor Martinez, specialized in trauma recovery and domestic abuse. Initially, I balked at the term domestic abuse, insisting that my situation was different. It was my mother-in-law, not my husband, who had attacked me. Abuse exists within a system, Dr. Martinez explained gently. Your mother-in-law may have thrown the oil, but your husband enabled her behavior for years. He chose not to protect you, not to establish boundaries. That's a form of emotional abuse through neglect. These sessions were often the hardest part of my week as they forced me to confront painful truths about my marriage that I had been avoiding. James had never been the partner I deserved even before the assault. He had consistently prioritized his mother's demands over my well-being, dismissed my concerns, and failed to stand beside me when I most needed support. The legal aspects of the situation moved forward on multiple fronts. Deborah was charged with second-degree assault, a felony that carried potential prison time. Despite hiring an expensive attorney who attempted to paint the incident as a momentary lapse in judgment from an otherwise exemplary citizen, the evidence was overwhelming. The charges were eventually reduced through a plea agreement, resulting in probation, mandatory anger management, and a permanent restraining order. The divorce proceedings revealed even more betrayal. James had attempted to transfer our house deed without my knowledge shortly after the assault, claiming it as a gift to his mother. Fortunately, the transfer couldn't be completed without my signature, and my attorney discovered the attempt before any damage was done. He's been completely consumed by his mother's influence, Amanda explained during a meeting about the divorce. But legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on regarding the house. Your documentation of being the primary financier is impeccable. 3 months after the assault, I felt ready to reclaim some independence. I found a small but modern apartment with excellent security features and moved out of Tanya's spare room, though she remained a constant presence in my life. The apartment became my new sanctuary, decorated entirely to my taste, without consideration for anyone else's preferences. A small but significant act of self-reclamation. During this time, I connected with a support group for survivors of domestic violence and family abuse. Listening to other women's stories helped me contextualize my own experience and reinforced my determination never to return to a situation where my boundaries weren't respected. Family isn't about blood, said Maria, a woman whose brother-in-law had stalked her for years with her husband's knowledge. It's about who treats you with dignity and respect. Sometimes we have to create our own families. Those words resonated deeply, especially when my mother flew in from Arizona, where she had retired. She took one look at my healing face, pulled me into a gentle hug, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you for valuing yourself enough to leave." For 2 weeks, she stayed with me, cooking nourishing meals, accompanying me to medical appointments, and providing the maternal care I had never received from Deborah. Her unconditional support was a powerful reminder that real family lifts you up rather than tears you down. 6 months after the assault, the divorce was finalized. James made a last-minute attempt to claim half the value of the house, but given the documented evidence of my financial contribution and his attempted fraudulent transfer, the judge ruled predominantly in my favor. I was left with full ownership of the house, though I had no desire to live there again. Working with my real estate colleagues, I listed the property and sold it for well above the asking price in Seattle's competitive market. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house Marjorie had tried to steal for $400,000 sold for nearly twice that amount. The proceeds gave me financial security and options for my future that I might not have had if I'd remained in that toxic situation. Perhaps the most unexpected development came in the form of a letter that arrived nearly 8 months after the assault. The return address was from California, and the name, Edward Stevens, meant nothing to me until I opened it. "Dear Leah," it began, "you don't know me, but I am James's father. I've been following the news about what happened to you, and I felt compelled to reach out." The letter went on to explain that contrary to Deborah's claims of abandonment, Edward had been systematically pushed out of his son's life through a campaign of parental alienation. Deborah had used many of the same manipulation tactics with him that she later employed with me, eventually making it impossible for him to maintain a relationship with his son despite court-ordered visitation. "I recognized the patterns immediately when I read about what happened," so he wrote. Deborah has always used emotional manipulation to control those around her, particularly James. I regret every day that I wasn't able to break through the walls she built between me and my son. He enclosed photos of himself with James as a toddler, court documents showing his years-long fight for visitation and records of child support payments that Deborah had always denied receiving. While this information didn't excuse James's adult choices, it provided context for the dysfunctional relationship dynamics that had shaped my marriage. I chose not to respond to Edward immediately, needing time to process this new perspective on the family that had caused me so much pain. But his letter reinforced my growing understanding that cycles of manipulation and abuse often span generations unless someone finds the courage to break the pattern. With the proceeds from the house sale, I established a small foundation dedicated to helping women escape financially abusive relationships, named New Foundations. It provides emergency grants for security deposits, legal fees, and other expenses that often prevent women from leaving dangerous situations. As the 1-year anniversary of the assault approached, I looked in the mirror at the faint scars that remained on my cheek and neck. They had faded significantly with treatment, though they would never disappear completely. But I no longer viewed them with shame or anger. These marks were evidence of survival reminders of my strength and resilience in the face of betrayal. "Scars show where we've been," my therapist had said once. "They don't dictate where we're going." And where I was going was forward, toward a life built on my terms, surrounded by people who valued my worth rather than sought to diminish it. I had learned the difficult truth that family isn't defined by blood or legal ties, but by respect, support, and genuine care for one another's well-being. In rebuilding my life, I discovered a freedom that I had never known within the constraints of my marriage, the freedom to define home and safety on my own terms. Standing firm against injustice had cost me a husband and the illusion of family, but it had saved something far more precious, myself. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who claimed to love you but tried to control your life? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. And if my journey has resonated with you in any way, please subscribe and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect and safety in all their relationships. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born or married into.